A millionaire finds a desperate mother in the rain with her twin babies, and when he helps her, he discovers this. The rain fell relentlessly, drenching the streets and filling the gutters as the storm raged on. Michael Carter, a reserved but respected millionaire, sat in the back seat of his black sedan, watching the rain blur the city lights through the window. Michael was on his way home from a long evening of meetings, feeling exhausted, his mind already shifting to the comfort of his quiet, luxurious penthouse. But something in the dark street caught his attention, an unusual sight that made him sit forward, his breath catching as he peered out into the storm. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next fantastic stories. A woman stood by the side of the road, clutching two small children to her chest. The rain poured down on them, soaking her worn clothes as she held the babies close, shielding them from the icy wind. She looked exhausted, her shoulders hunched and shivering, but her arms never wavered, her gaze never leaving her children. Michael's driver slowed the car, sensing his passenger's attention, and Michael felt a surge of emotions he hadn't experienced in years, a mix of curiosity, concern, and an unexplainable pull to help this stranger on the side of the road. The woman's face was pale, her eyes hollow with fatigue and despair. Michael couldn't look away, drawn in by the haunting sorrow etched into her expression. She seemed young, no older than her mid-20s, but there was a weight in her gaze that spoke of hardships he couldn't begin to imagine. The babies nestled against her were wrapped in thin blankets, shivering as the rain soaked through, their tiny cries barely audible over the roar of the storm. Michael's chest tightened as he watched her, a woman clearly on the edge of her strength, struggling to protect the only things that mattered to her. Without hesitation, Michael leaned forward, his voice firm but calm. "Stop the car," he instructed his driver, feeling a compulsion to intervene that surprised even him. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, momentarily unsure, but Michael's resolve was clear. The car came to a stop, and Michael stepped out, feeling the cold rain immediately seep through his coat as he approached the woman. She flinched as he came closer, pulling her children tighter, her eyes wary and guarded. Michael raised his hands, trying to convey reassurance. "Miss, are you all right? Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the urgency he felt. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between him and her children, as if calculating the risks of trusting a stranger. She took a shaky breath before speaking, her voice barely audible over the rain. "My home, it's gone," she whispered, her words laced with a raw desperation. "The flood, it took everything. I don't have anywhere to go." Michael felt a surge of empathy so intense it nearly startled him. He knew what it was to lose, to feel helpless, though his life's losses had been softened by wealth and privilege. This woman, however, had nothing, no safety net to catch her fall. And here she was, holding onto her children with a fierce determination, standing alone against the world. The sight moved him in ways he couldn't explain, awakening a part of him that had lain dormant for years. He extended a hand toward her, his gaze steady and sincere. "Please," he said gently, "let me help. I can give you and your children a warm place to stay, at least for tonight. No one should be out here in this storm." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope, torn between pride and the undeniable need for help. She glanced down at her babies, their small faces wet with rain, and a tear escaped her eye, mingling with the raindrops on her cheeks. Finally, she nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you," she murmured, barely able to meet his gaze. I don't know what else to do." The drive to Michael's home was quiet, filled only by the soft murmurs of the babies and the constant patter of rain on the car windows. Michael sat across from the woman, watching her as she cradled her children, her hands trembling slightly. Now that they were out of the storm, he could see her more clearly. Her eyes, dark and tired, were set deeply into a face that had clearly seen too much suffering. Yet, there was a quiet resilience in her gaze, a strength that seemed to keep her grounded despite everything she had been through. Michael realized he hadn't even asked her name. It was unusual for him. His life was organized, structured, full of polite formalities and careful boundaries. He rarely acted without thought. But something about this woman had cut through his usual detachment, stirred a compassion he had kept guarded for years. He cleared his throat, his voice soft but firm. "I'm Michael," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. And you are? The woman hesitated, clutching the babies closer, as though giving her name might make her more vulnerable. But after a moment, she met his gaze and nodded. I'm Claire, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. And these are my twins, Liam and Sophie. She looked down at the babies, her face softening as she murmured their names. Michael watched the tenderness in her expression, a fierce love that seemed to radiate from her even through her exhaustion. As they approached his penthouse, Michael glanced around the car, noticing how out of place Claire seemed against the leather seats and polished wood of the luxury vehicle. Her clothes were damp and worn, her hair tangled from the rain, but she held herself with a quiet dignity, an unspoken strength that was almost regal. He wondered what had led her to this moment, what series of events had brought her to the side of a road in the pouring rain with 2 infants and no place to go. He wanted to ask, but something held him back, a feeling that the weight of her story was one that needed time to unfold. When they reached the building, Michael led Claire and the children inside, guiding her through the sleek, modern lobby and into the private elevator that took them up to his penthouse. Claire's gaze was wary, as though she couldn't quite believe where she was, her eyes scanning every corner of the luxurious surroundings. She held Liam and Sophie close, her body tense, as though bracing for some unseen danger. Michael felt a pang of empathy. He could sense that she was unused to kindness, that perhaps life had shown her more hardship than hope. The elevator doors opened to his penthouse, a vast, elegant space filled with soft light, floor-to-ceiling windows, and understated luxury. Claire looked around, her eyes widening as she took in the high ceilings, the soft rugs, the view of the city twinkling in the rain-soaked night. She looked down quickly, a hint of embarrassment in her expression, as though she felt she didn't belong here. Michael gestured toward the living room, his tone gentle. Please, make yourself comfortable. You're welcome here, Claire, he said, trying to put her at ease. She settled onto the plush couch, carefully placing the babies beside her. Liam and Sophie were small and delicate, their cheeks flushed from the cold. They watched Michael with wide, curious eyes, their tiny hands reaching for the warmth and comfort of their mother. Claire wrapped her arms around them, her movements slow and protective. Michael felt his chest tighten as he watched her, marveling at the strength it must have taken to get this far, to protect her children against the odds. Michael's housekeeper, sensing his guest's needs, brought a blanket and a tray with warm tea, setting it quietly on the coffee table before disappearing. Claire accepted the blanket gratefully, wrapping it around herself and her babies, visibly relaxing as the warmth began to seep in. She looked at Michael, her expression a mix of gratitude and hesitation. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with a vulnerability that made him feel both protective and deeply humbled. I didn't expect this. I don't know how to thank you. There's no need, Michael replied gently, taking a seat across from her. Everyone needs help sometimes. And it's clear you've been doing everything you can. He hesitated, feeling the urge to ask her about her situation, but decided to wait. He could sense her need for space, her hesitation to reveal too much, and he wanted to respect that. He had spent so long in a world of negotiations and business deals, but he knew this was something different. This was about trust, and he needed to give her time to feel safe. As the rain continued to fall outside, Michael watched as Claire fed and soothed her children, her hands gentle but practiced, each movement filled with care. She was focused, her entire being poured into the simple acts of caring for her babies, as though everything else had faded into the background. There was a quiet beauty in her devotion, a strength that captivated him, and he found himself wondering how such a remarkable woman had ended up in such desperate circumstances. The babies finally drifted off to sleep, their soft breaths filling the room. Claire looked up, catching Michael's gaze, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. She seemed as if she wanted to say something, but her words faltered, caught between gratitude and pride. I didn't know what to do, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. When the flood came, everything was destroyed. All I had left was them. I had nowhere to go. Her words hit Michael with a force he hadn't anticipated. The idea of losing everything, of being left with nothing but the will to keep going for the sake of her children, was something he struggled to comprehend. He could see now how fragile her situation truly was, how close she had come to being swallowed by the storm. both the one outside and the one life had thrown at her. And he felt a resolve settle within him, a decision that he hadn't fully formed but knew he would see through. As the storm continued to rage outside, Michael watched Claire with a quiet intensity, his mind racing. She sat on his couch, holding her children close, her gaze drifting from the babies to the luxurious surroundings as though she couldn't quite believe where she was. Each glance around the room held both wonder and caution. She was clearly grateful for the shelter, yet he sensed a lingering mistrust, a wariness that came from a life of facing hardships alone. Michael felt a strange need to understand her, to uncover the layers beneath her guarded expressions. He rarely invited people into his personal life. Trust was something he gave sparingly, if at all. His wealth and status had long created a barrier between him and the world. Yet with Claire, he felt a connection he couldn't explain, a pull to understand the woman who had endured so much without complaint. He couldn't shake the image of her standing in the rain, cradling her children with such fierce determination, as if her sheer will alone could shield them from the world. Clearing his throat, Michael leaned forward, his voice gentle but curious. "Claire, I know this is difficult, but if there's anything you need, please, don't hesitate to tell me. I want to help, if I can." He felt a twinge of awkwardness, unused to the vulnerability this offer required. Usually, his generosity was delivered through his foundation or carefully planned donations, not face-to-face, and certainly not to a woman he had just met. Claire looked at him, her gaze unreadable, as though trying to gauge his sincerity. After a moment, she spoke, her voice soft but filled with an unexpected strength. "I appreciate that. Really, I do. But I've learned not to rely on others. I've had to find my own way." She glanced down at her babies, her fingers brushing over their cheeks with tenderness. It's been hard, with no family and no one to lean on." Her words struck a chord in Michael, stirring memories he had long kept buried. He, too, knew what it was like to feel isolated, to push others away to protect himself. In his world, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, and vulnerability was a weakness. Yet, watching Claire, he realized how lonely such a life had made him. He could see his own guardedness reflected in her, the way she held back, her pride keeping her from asking for the help she desperately needed. "Sometimes," he said, his voice softer now, "life has a way of forcing us to accept help, even when we don't want it. I've spent a long time keeping people at a distance, but sometimes it's worth letting someone in." He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to share this with her, to reveal the cracks in his own armor. Yet, as he spoke, he felt a strange relief, as though finally acknowledging his own isolation. Claire looked at him, her eyes softening as she absorbed his words. For a moment, her guard seemed to drop, and he caught a glimpse of the woman beneath the hardships, the mother who loved fiercely, the person who had fought so hard to protect her children. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done tonight without your kindness. It's been so long since someone looked at me with compassion." The raw vulnerability in her voice made his chest tighten. Michael realized he couldn't walk away from this, couldn't simply offer her shelter for the night and send her back to face the world alone. Something about her had shifted something within him, softened the barriers he had built. He felt a quiet resolve begin to form, a decision to do more than just offer temporary aid. But he knew she wasn't ready to accept much more, not yet. They sat in silence, the sounds of the city muffled by the rain. The babies stirred, their small hands reaching up as they nuzzled closer to Claire, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Michael watched them, feeling a pang of wonder at the innocence they represented, the purity untouched by the harshness of life. He had no children of his own, had never even considered the idea, yet he felt a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Claire's gaze softened as she watched her babies, her lips curving into a tender smile that melted the exhaustion from her face. She glanced at Michael, her expression thoughtful. "You probably think I'm a fool," she murmured, almost to herself, "bringing children into a life I could barely sustain. But they're all I have now. They're the reason I keep going, the reason I couldn't give up, no matter how bad things got." Michael shook his head, his voice firm. "I don't think you're a fool at all. It takes courage to keep going when the world gives you every reason to give up. And I can see how much they mean to you." He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "If anything, I admire you. Many people in your position would have lost hope. But you're here, fighting for them." Claire's eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. She looked away, her cheeks flushed, as though unused to such kindness. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted softly. "I've been fighting for so long that sometimes I forget what it's like to feel safe." Her words were barely above a whisper, each one laced with a sadness that cut through Michael's heart. He wanted to tell her that she could feel safe here, that he would make sure of it, but he held back, sensing she needed time to trust again. They sat in silence, two people from vastly different worlds, yet bound by a shared understanding of loneliness and resilience. Michael felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him, a quiet joy that came not from wealth or success but from a connection he hadn't expected. Claire, with her strength and vulnerability, had reminded him of the importance of human connection, of kindness given freely, without expectation. As the storm began to die down outside, Michael glanced at Claire, feeling a deep respect for her courage and a desire to help her beyond this one night. He wasn't sure how, or even if she would allow it, but he knew he couldn't simply walk away. Not anymore. The hours slipped by quietly as Michael and Claire sat together, each lost in their own thoughts, the soft breathing of the sleeping twins a gentle backdrop to the silence. Michael studied her from across the room, noting how her body finally began to relax as warmth seeped in and the weight of her exhaustion pulled her shoulders down. The vulnerability he saw in her reminded him of the difficult road he'd walked to get where he was, his own journey paved with loss and loneliness, masked by wealth and success. But Claire's journey seemed harder still, forged without any of the privileges that had cushioned his own struggles. Eventually, Michael rose and moved to the kitchen, preparing something simple to eat, knowing that after such a difficult night, Claire would need more than a warm place to sleep. His staff had gone home for the night, leaving him to fend for himself in the large, sleek kitchen. He felt an odd satisfaction as he worked, chopping vegetables and heating broth, the silence filled only by the soft clinking of utensils. It was rare for him to do such tasks alone, to focus on something as mundane as preparing food for someone else, but there was a comfort in the simplicity of it. A few moments later, he returned with a tray carrying bowls of soup and bread, setting it gently on the coffee table beside Claire. She looked up, surprised, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the sight of the food, as though unable to believe someone would go out of their way for her. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured, her voice laced with both gratitude and disbelief. I don't remember the last time someone made me a meal." Michael offered a gentle smile, settling back into his seat. "You need to keep up your strength," he replied, his tone light. "For them," he added, nodding to the twins. "You've been through enough tonight. Let someone else take care of you for a change." He could see her struggling to accept the offer, her pride and independence warring with her obvious need. But finally, she reached for the bowl, giving him a small, grateful nod before taking a sip. As she ate, Michael found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand how she had come to this point. He hesitated before asking, unsure if his curiosity would be welcome. "If you're comfortable sharing, I'd like to know, what happened, Claire? How did things get this difficult?" He didn't want to press her, but he knew that understanding her story was essential if he wanted to help her. Claire's face grew still, her gaze lowering as she considered his question. After a long pause, she began to speak, her voice soft and hesitant. "I wasn't always alone," she said, her tone filled with the weight of memories. "I was married, once. My husband, he was kind, at first, but things changed after the twins were born. The stress, the long hours, he couldn't handle it. He walked out on us when they were barely a few months old, and since then, it's been just the three of us." Her voice trembled, and she took a shaky breath before continuing. Michael listened in silence, his chest tightening as he absorbed the details of her story. The thought of her being abandoned, left to fend for herself and her children, filled him with a quiet fury. He had seen the worst in people through his business dealings, but hearing about this kind of personal betrayal made him feel something deeper, a sadness, a helpless anger at a world that could leave someone like Claire so vulnerable. But he kept his emotions hidden, letting her speak, knowing she needed someone to listen. Claire continued, her gaze distant as she recounted the series of events that had brought her to this point. I tried everything to make it work. Took odd jobs, saved every penny, moved from place to place just to find somewhere affordable. But every time I thought I'd finally gotten ahead, something would go wrong. A bill I couldn't pay, a job that didn't last, and finally, the flood. Her voice grew thick, and she glanced away, blinking back tears. We lost everything. Everything I'd worked so hard to hold on to. Michael felt a deep sadness settle over him as he listened to her story, her resilience both admirable and heartbreaking. He realized that what she had been through was more than he could imagine, that the strength it must have taken to reach this point was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. He could see now why she had held onto her pride so tightly, why accepting help had seemed so difficult for her. She had carried her children through every hardship, driven only by her love for them, and here she was, a mother who refused to give up even when the world had left her with nothing. You've done more than most people could, he said quietly, his voice filled with respect. I can't imagine the strength that's taken, Claire. And you should never feel ashamed for asking for help. It doesn't make you weak, it just means you've had to be strong for too long. His words surprised him, reflecting a tenderness he hadn't realized he felt. But he meant every word, and he could see the impact his statement had on her, the way her shoulders relaxed just a little, the way a faint blush touched her cheeks. Claire nodded, her eyes still focused on her sleeping children, a soft smile forming on her lips. They're my world, she whispered, her voice filled with love. I'd do anything for them. They're what keeps me going, even when I feel like I have nothing left. Her gaze lifted to meet his, her eyes filled with gratitude. And I don't know why you stopped for me tonight, why you cared. But thank you, Michael. I don't know what I would have done without your kindness. Michael looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew, in that moment, that he couldn't walk away from this. Helping her wasn't just a passing act of charity, it was something deeper, something that felt profoundly right. He wanted to be a part of her journey, to see her rebuild the life she deserved, and he was determined to help her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. You're not alone, Claire, he replied softly, his voice steady. Not anymore. The next morning, the rain had ceased, leaving a soft mist over the city that blurred the skyline and softened the early light pouring into Michael's penthouse. Michael woke early, a strange sense of anticipation nudging him awake. He walked into the main living area to find Claire already up, cradling one of the twins while the other lay curled beside her, still sound asleep. Her expression was tender, her gaze fixed on her children as though they were her anchor in a world that had tried to shake her loose time and again. Seeing her there, so quietly protective, stirred something in him. Michael had spent most of his life pursuing success, his every achievement carefully planned and executed. But here was a woman who had lost everything yet still held onto the only treasures that mattered to her. It humbled him, reminded him of what true strength looked like. He cleared his throat softly to announce his presence, and Claire looked up, offering him a shy, grateful smile. I hope you both slept well, Michael said, his voice gentle as he moved closer. He noticed a lightness in her expression, a small trace of peace that hadn't been there the night before. She nodded, adjusting the blanket around her children. I don't think I've slept that deeply in years, she admitted, a soft laugh escaping her lips. Thank you, Michael. I'm not sure how to repay you for everything you've done. There's no need to repay me, Claire, he replied, his voice firm but kind. I'm just glad you're safe. He paused, gathering his thoughts before he spoke again, feeling the weight of the offer he was about to make. Actually, I've been thinking, if you'd allow it, I'd like to help you beyond just a place to stay for the night. I have connections, resources, ways to help you and your children rebuild. Claire's eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise and hesitation crossing her face. She looked down at the twins, her fingers brushing over their small hands as she absorbed his words. Michael, I appreciate that, more than I can say. But I don't know. I've spent so long trying to stand on my own, to prove I can do this by myself. Her voice was soft, tinged with both pride and vulnerability, a testament to her fierce independence. Michael nodded, understanding her hesitation. He could see that accepting help was difficult for her, that she had been conditioned by life struggles to rely only on herself. but he felt an unshakable urge to be part of her healing, to show her that she didn't have to carry this weight alone. "I admire your strength, Claire," he said gently. "But I don't think needing help takes away from it. I believe it only adds to it. Sometimes, real courage means letting someone else carry the burden with you." His words seemed to reach her, and he saw her expression soften, her resistance wavering. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't even know what to say," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "No one's ever offered me this kind of kindness before. I'm so used to fighting my way through everything alone." Michael took a step closer, his gaze steady. "Then let me be the first to show you that you don't have to." He gave her a reassuring smile, hoping she could feel the sincerity behind his words. "This isn't about charity, Claire. I'm not just helping a stranger on the street. I want to do this because I believe in you. I believe that you and your children deserve a chance to start again, to build a life where you don't have to struggle just to survive." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek, and she brushed it away quickly, glancing down at the twins. She looked back up at him, her expression filled with a quiet acceptance, a fragile hope that had been kindled by his offer. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I don't know what the future holds, but maybe it's time I trust that someone else might be willing to walk this path with me." "Thank you, Michael. Truly." Michael felt a swell of relief, a quiet joy that spread through him. He knew this was only the beginning, that rebuilding her life would take time, effort, and patience. But he felt committed to the journey, knowing that this act of kindness was changing something within him, too. 4 years, his life had been focused on material success, on building his fortune, but in Claire's struggle, he had found something far more meaningful, a purpose that went beyond wealth and status. He spent the rest of the morning with her, discussing possible plans. They talked about finding stable housing, securing a steady job, and creating a life where she could feel safe and independent once again. He made calls to his contacts, setting up meetings and resources she could use, each step a small victory on the path to rebuilding. As he spoke, he noticed a spark of determination growing in Claire's eyes, a hope he hadn't seen there before. By noon, the plans were starting to take shape, and Michael could see a new confidence building within her. Claire held her children close, her expression one of quiet gratitude as she listened to him, absorbing the possibilities he was laying before her. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't look burdened by her past, but instead, she looked ready to embrace a future she had never thought possible. As they finished discussing the initial steps, Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "This is just the beginning, Claire. And I'll be here to support you, however you need." She looked up at him, her expression filled with a depth of gratitude that took his breath away. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you," she murmured, her voice filled with emotion. "But you've given me something I haven't had in years, a chance." And with those words, Michael felt a new resolve, a quiet joy that he hadn't expected. Over the next few days, Michael's penthouse transformed from a place of quiet solitude into something warmer, filled with the gentle sounds of Claire and her children. It felt almost surreal to him. His life had always been a meticulously organized schedule of meetings, investments, and polished social events. Now, each day started with the soft murmur of Claire's voice as she soothed her twins, followed by the faint, happy gurgles of Liam and Sophie as they discovered the world around them, sheltered for once from the hardships they had known. Michael hadn't expected how much he would enjoy their presence. There was a lightness in the air, a softness that felt unfamiliar but comforting. Claire, though still cautious and a bit shy, seemed to relax a little more each day. She had started to trust the safety of her surroundings, allowing herself moments of rest, her shoulders less tense and her expression softer. Watching her care for the twins, Michael couldn't help but feel admiration, a respect for the resilience she had built from a life full of struggle. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Michael joined Claire on the balcony, where she sat holding Sophie while Liam slept peacefully inside. The city lights were beginning to flicker on, casting a glow that reflected off the glass buildings around them. Claire seemed lost in thought, her gaze distant as she watched the city below. Michael sensed her unease and approached slowly, careful not to disrupt her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice soft but warm. Claire looked up, startled, then offered him a small, grateful smile. "I was just thinking about how strange this all feels," she admitted, her voice laced with a mixture of wonder and lingering fear. "I keep waiting to wake up and realize this was all a dream. I haven't felt safe like this in years. I almost don't know what to do with it." She laughed softly, though the sound was tinged with a sadness that spoke of a life accustomed to uncertainty. Michael sat beside her, looking out at the city skyline. He knew the feeling of mistrust she described, that strange discomfort of safety after years of struggle. Though his struggles had been different, he, too, had often felt like an outsider in his own life. "I know it's hard to believe, but you deserve this, Claire," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "You and your children deserve a life where you don't have to constantly look over your shoulder. I want you to know that you're safe here, and that I'll help you find a place where you can build the life you want." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unspoken gratitude, and then nodded, her shoulders finally releasing a tension that she had carried for far too long. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm still adjusting, I guess. It's hard to believe someone like you would care about someone like me." She shook her head, as though struggling to understand his kindness. Michael felt a pang of sympathy, realizing how deeply life had conditioned her to expect so little from the world. "Someone like me?" he repeated, surprised. "Claire, you are one of the strongest people I've met. I don't think of you as different or lesser. You've endured things that would break most people." He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Please don't ever think that kindness is something you don't deserve. It's something everyone deserves, especially you." She looked away, blinking back tears, clearly moved by his words. She shifted Sophie in her arms, and for a moment, silence enveloped them, filled only by the sounds of the city below. Then she spoke, her voice soft. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to stand on my own again. I want to, more than anything. Not just for myself, but for them. They deserve a mother who's strong, who can protect them from the world." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "And you will," he assured her, his tone unwavering. "This is only temporary. Soon, we'll find a place for you and the twins. And until then, I'll be here, helping you get back on your feet. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're ready to face the world again, with confidence and security." Claire seemed to draw strength from his words, her shoulders lifting as though a weight had been lifted from them. She looked at him, her expression softened by the trust that had begun to take root. "I don't know if I can ever repay you," she whispered, her voice laced with sincerity. "But I'll try, somehow. You've given me more than I could ever repay: hope, a future, a chance to believe in something better." Michael felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet joy at her words. "Your gratitude is more than enough, Claire," he replied softly. "And seeing you rebuild your life, finding happiness and security, will be all the thanks I could ever need." He knew he meant it. Helping her had become something deeply personal, a purpose he hadn't expected to find. For so long, his life had revolved around business, wealth, and control. But Claire and her children had awakened something within him, a need to give, to support, to protect. As the evening grew darker, they continued talking, sharing stories of their lives, their struggles, their hopes for the future. For the first time in years, Michael felt a connection that transcended wealth and social status, a bond rooted in compassion, respect, and mutual resilience. It was a friendship that felt honest, free from the facades he had grown accustomed to. When the evening ended, Claire returned inside with the twins, leaving Michael alone on the balcony. He watched the lights of the city, his mind filled with thoughts of her journey, her strength, her unwavering love for her children. He had never imagined himself in this role, a guardian to a struggling mother and her children. But he felt a quiet resolve, a certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In that moment, he knew that helping Claire and her children wasn't just a passing act of charity. It was something deeper, a commitment he intended to honor. The following days unfolded quietly, each one bringing a steady rhythm to their lives as Claire and her children settled into the safety of Michael's penthouse. The tension that had once lingered in her expression began to soften, replaced by a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. Michael found himself drawn to the quiet presence of Claire and her children, their warmth filling spaces in his home that had long felt empty. For so many years, he had been surrounded by luxury, but it was only now, with their laughter and warmth, that his home felt truly alive. Michael's mornings began to feel different. He would wake to the gentle sounds of the twins' giggles or Claire's soft humming as she prepared breakfast. Sometimes, he would join her in the kitchen, sharing quiet conversations and simple tasks that felt strangely grounding. She had a natural ease with the twins, her patience and care evident in each small gesture, each smile or laugh. Watching her, he felt a deep respect, a quiet admiration that only grew as he saw her resilience unfold. One morning, as Michael sat at the dining table sipping coffee, Claire joined him, looking hesitant yet determined. She glanced down at her hands, fidgeting slightly, before meeting his gaze. "Michael, I wanted to talk to you about finding a job," she began, her voice a blend of hope and uncertainty. "You've done so much for me and the twins, but I can't keep relying on your generosity forever. I want to start standing on my own, little by little." Her words surprised him, though he understood the strength behind them. He nodded, giving her an encouraging smile. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Claire. And you're absolutely right, you should be able to support yourself. I'd be more than happy to help you find something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But let's take it one step at a time. Finding something that works with the twins' schedule and your skills might take a little patience, but we'll get there." Claire looked relieved, her shoulders relaxing as she offered him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Michael. I know I'm not trained in anything specific, but I'm willing to work hard. I'll do whatever it takes to give my children a good life." Her determination was unmistakable, and he could see the fierce resolve in her eyes, a resolve that had been her driving force through countless hardships. Michael leaned back, considering her words. "Have you thought about what kind of work you might enjoy?" he asked gently, hoping to gauge her interests and strengths. Claire hesitated, her gaze thoughtful as she weighed the question. "I used to work in a small cafe before I had the twins," she replied slowly. "I enjoyed the routine, the people. It was simple, but it made me feel connected, like I had a place in the world." Her answer stirred something within him, and he realized he wanted more than just to help her find any job. He wanted to see her thrive, to help her find a role where she could feel a sense of purpose and fulfillment. "I think that's a good place to start," he said, his voice warm. "A job where you feel connected, where you can work with people, that sounds like a perfect fit for you." As they talked, he made a mental note to contact a few friends in the hospitality industry, people he trusted to offer her a position where she would be treated with respect. He knew that her journey wouldn't be easy, that adjusting to a new job while raising two small children would be a challenge. But he also knew that Claire's resilience was stronger than most. She had already proven that time and again. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Liam's laughter from the living room, a cheerful, bubbling sound that echoed through the apartment. Michael glanced over, watching as the twins played on the floor, their faces bright with joy as they stacked blocks and giggled at each other's antics. Claire followed his gaze, her eyes softening as she watched her children, the love in her expression unmistakable. "They are amazing," Michael murmured, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "They are so happy, so full of life." He looked at her, his eyes earnest. "And that's because of you, Claire. You've given them everything, despite everything you've been through. They're so lucky to have you." His words brought a faint blush to her cheeks, and she looked away, her lips curving into a shy smile. "Thank you," she replied softly, her voice filled with emotion. "They're my whole world. I don't know where I'd be without them. They keep me going, even on the hardest days." Her gaze drifted back to the twins, her expression a mixture of pride and tenderness that made Michael's chest tighten. He could see how much she loved them, how her every thought, her every decision, was guided by her desire to protect and care for them. As they continued talking, Michael found himself wanting to be part of their journey, to support Claire as she took her first steps toward independence. He was no longer simply offering her a place to stay, he was invested in her success, in her dreams for herself and her children. This wasn't just about kindness, it was about seeing someone he deeply respected find the stability and happiness she deserved. That evening, as the twins drifted off to sleep, Claire joined him in the living room, sitting beside him on the couch. She looked at him, her expression filled with gratitude. "Michael, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you enough," she said softly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. You didn't have to, but you did." Michael reached over, placing a gentle hand on hers. "Claire, helping you has given me something too," he replied, his voice steady. "You've reminded me what it means to care, to connect. In helping you, I found a purpose I hadn't realized I was missing." He hesitated, the words heavy with a meaning he hadn't expected. "You and your children, you've brought warmth into my life. And for that, I'm grateful." They sat in silence for a moment, the bond between them growing stronger, rooted in mutual respect, gratitude, and an unexpected understanding. Michael realized then that his life would never be the same. This journey with Claire and her children had become more than just a single act of kindness. It had become a chapter of his life, one he was now unwilling to close. As the days passed, Claire settled into a quiet, steady rhythm at Michael's penthouse. Each day she grew more comfortable, her spirit slowly lifting as the constant strain she'd carried for years began to ease. The twins thrived in the warmth and security of their new environment, their laughter filling the penthouse with a joy Michael hadn't known he was missing. And with each passing day, Michael found himself drawn deeper into their lives, captivated by the sense of purpose and fulfillment he felt in helping Claire rebuild. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and cast a golden glow over the city, Michael sat with Claire in the living room, discussing plans for her future. He had managed to reach out to a friend who owned a small, charming cafe and had arranged an interview for her. The cafe was cozy and welcoming, and he could picture her there, engaging with customers, creating a life that allowed her the independence and stability she desired. Claire listened, her eyes bright with excitement and a hint of nerves, a spark he hadn't seen in her before. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice filled with both anticipation and a lingering hint of doubt. "I mean, I'd love to work again, to have something steady, but it's been so long since I've felt capable of doing anything like this." Her gaze dropped to her hands, and Michael could see the vulnerability there, the years of hardship that had chipped away at her confidence. Michael reached out, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Claire, I have no doubts about your abilities," he said, his voice steady. "You're one of the most resilient people I've ever met. I know that you'll bring the same strength and dedication to this job as you do to everything else in your life. This is just the first step toward building the life you and the twins deserve." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and newfound hope. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought someone would believe in me like this. You've given me a chance to dream again, to believe that there's a future for us. I can't thank you enough." They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in thought, until Claire spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Michael, can I ask you something?" She looked at him, her expression serious but gentle. "Why did you help me that night? You could have driven by. Most people would have." There was no accusation in her tone, only a genuine curiosity, as though she were trying to understand the kindness he had extended without expecting anything in return. Michael considered her question, a thoughtful expression crossing his face as he thought back to that night. "I've asked myself that, too," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I've spent most of my life focused on building my career, my wealth, always driven by the idea that success would give me fulfillment. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what mattered." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "When I saw you standing in the rain, protecting your children with everything you had, it reminded me of what I'd been missing. I saw a strength in you, a resilience I hadn't known I was searching for. Helping you became more than just an act of kindness. It was a chance to feel human again." Claire listened, her expression softening with understanding. "I think I understand," she said gently. "In some ways, I think we were both searching for something that night. And maybe, by some miracle, we found it in each other." Her words hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them, a bond born of compassion, respect, and a shared need for connection. Just then, Liam toddled over, his tiny hands reaching up to Michael, a wide grin spreading across his face. Michael laughed, scooping him up and settling him on his lap. Liam giggled, reaching for Michael's tie, fascinated by the way it dangled and swayed. Claire watched, her face lighting up with a joy that was both tender and bittersweet. "He adores you, you know," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "They both do. I don't think I've ever seen them so happy, so safe." Michael felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected, a warmth that filled his heart as he looked down at Liam, who was now tugging on his tie with enthusiastic curiosity. He had never imagined himself in this role, a protector, a friend, even a father figure to these little lives that had entered his world so unexpectedly. But as he sat there with Liam in his arms, he realized that he wanted to be part of their lives, that helping Claire and her children had become more than just a temporary commitment. It had become something deeply personal, something he wasn't willing to let go of. As the evening wore on, Michael found himself sharing stories from his own past, memories of his own childhood, his journey from modest beginnings to success, the sacrifices he had made along the way. Claire listened intently, her expression filled with empathy as she absorbed each detail. He realized he hadn't spoken so openly about his life in years, and it felt strangely freeing to share these parts of himself with someone who listened without judgment, without expectation. And as Claire shared her own dreams for the future, a small home for her and the twins, a garden where they could play, a life where she could work and still be present for her children, Michael felt a powerful resolve settle within him. He wanted to be part of that future, to see her achieve the stability and happiness she so deeply deserved. In helping her, he had found a purpose that transcended wealth and status, a purpose that filled his life with a sense of meaning he hadn't realized he was missing. When the evening finally came to a close, Michael stood and walked Claire to her room, a quiet sense of contentment filling him as they said goodnight. He watched as she closed the door, her gratitude and kindness lingering in the air, a reminder of the journey they had both embarked upon. He returned to his own room, his mind racing with plans for the days ahead, knowing that this was only the beginning of a chapter that would forever change both of their lives. And as he lay in the quiet of his penthouse, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a feeling that for the first time in years, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The day of Claire's interview arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and nerves. Michael watched her prepare that morning, the determination in her movements unmistakable. She had chosen a simple, elegant dress Michael had bought for her, a gesture she had hesitated to accept, but which he had assured her was merely practical. Now, as she adjusted her clothes and smoothed her hair, he saw in her a new spark, a woman ready to reclaim her life. As he walked her to the door, Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be amazing, Claire," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "Remember, they're as lucky to have you as you are to have the opportunity." She looked up at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and offered a small, brave smile. "Thank you, Michael. For everything. I don't think I could have made it here without your help." After she left, Michael found himself pacing the penthouse, an unfamiliar restlessness filling him. He wanted the best for her, wanted this job to be more than just a fresh start. He wanted it to be the beginning of a life where she and the twins would be safe, secure, and self-sufficient. His mind wandered back to the late-night conversations they had shared, the trust she had placed in him, and the hope he had seen blossom in her eyes. He couldn't bear the thought of her facing disappointment. Hours later, when Claire returned, Michael saw her face light up as she walked through the door, her expression a mixture of relief and joy. "I got it," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They offered me the job." She laughed, covering her mouth as though she couldn't believe her own words. Michael's heart swelled with pride, and without thinking, he stepped forward, wrapping her in a hug. Claire hesitated only for a second before relaxing into his embrace, a quiet relief settling over both of them. "That's incredible, Claire," he murmured, pulling back to look at her. "I knew you could do it. This is the first step toward the life you deserve." He saw tears glistening in her eyes, her joy softened by a depth of gratitude that touched him deeply. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." But Michael wasn't done helping. Over the days following her interview, he set plans into motion to ensure Claire had more than just a job. He wanted her to have stability and comfort, a true foundation upon which she could build her life. And so, in a quiet, purposeful move, He contacted a close friend in real estate, arranging for Claire and the twins to have a modest but beautiful apartment, fully paid for, in a safe neighborhood. It would be a place they could call their own, free from the lingering fear of homelessness or uncertainty. The decision to secure this apartment felt right, yet he knew he would have to approach it carefully. Claire's pride and independence were deeply rooted. He didn't want her to feel as though he was simply handing her a life without her having earned it. He waited for the right moment, unsure how she might respond, but certain that he was ready to do whatever was necessary to give her and the twins the security they deserved. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Michael invited Claire to sit with him in the living room, a quiet intensity in his expression. She looked at him, sensing his seriousness, and waited as he gathered his thoughts. "Claire," he began slowly, choosing his words with care, "I want to talk to you about something important." He saw her tense slightly, her eyes flickering with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "I know how much you value your independence," he continued, his voice gentle. "And I want you to know that I respect that deeply. You've built your life with resilience and strength, and I would never want to take that from you. But," he paused, feeling the weight of his words, "I've arranged for something that I believe will give you the security you need to focus on building your future." She looked at him, a mixture of confusion and curiosity in her gaze. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her voice cautious. Michael took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "I found an apartment for you and the twins. It's a place where you'll feel safe, where you can begin to rebuild without the fear of losing your home. I've taken care of the costs, so you can focus on your work, on providing for Liam and Sophie. You won't have to worry about rent, or whether you'll have to move again. This is a place you can call home." Claire's face registered a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, gratitude, and finally, a profound hesitation. She looked away, her hands clasping together as she struggled to absorb his words. "Michael, I don't know if I can accept that," she murmured, her voice filled with an uncertainty he had expected but hoped to ease. "You've already done so much for us. I don't want to rely on you forever." He leaned forward, his voice soft but resolute. "Claire, this isn't charity. This is an investment in someone I believe in. I want you and the twins to have a chance to rebuild without constantly looking over your shoulder. You've carried this weight alone for so long. Let me carry some of it with you, even just for a little while." Her eyes met his, filled with both gratitude and a lingering fear of dependence. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is more than I could have dreamed of. But I don't want you to think I'm just taking advantage of your kindness." Michael reached for her hand, his gaze unwavering. "Claire, you've given me something I didn't even know I needed: purpose, connection, a reminder of what really matters. Helping you isn't a burden, it's a privilege." His words settled over them, filling the space with a quiet understanding. "This isn't just about generosity, Claire. It's about believing in you and wanting to see you thrive." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "All right," she whispered, her voice steady with acceptance. "I'll accept it, because I trust you. And I want a stable home for Liam and Sophie more than anything." She looked at him, her gaze softened by gratitude. "You've changed my life in ways I'll never be able to repay. I hope you know that." Michael felt a surge of warmth, a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. They sat together in a shared silence, a profound bond linking them in ways neither had anticipated. He knew this was only the beginning of her new life, but in that moment, he felt an unshakable certainty that they had both found something far more valuable than they had ever expected. In the days that followed, Claire and Michael made preparations for the big move into her new apartment. Michael coordinated the final arrangements with his real estate contact, carefully ensuring that everything was set for her arrival. Meanwhile, Claire spent her free hours sorting through the few belongings she had, preparing for the transition that would mark the beginning of a new chapter for her and the twins. The apartment was modest but beautiful, a two-bedroom space with natural light pouring through large windows, warm wooden floors, and a small garden area where Liam and Sophie could one day play. The morning of the move was filled with a quiet excitement, though Claire felt an underlying nervousness, a disbelief that this was actually happening. Michael noticed her slight hesitation as she packed the final bag, her hands lingering on each item as if she feared she might wake up and find it all a dream. Sensing her unease, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're ready for this, Claire," he said softly, his voice filled with confidence. "You've worked so hard to get to this point. This is yours. You deserve it." Claire looked at him, her eyes glistening with emotion. She nodded, her smile a blend of gratitude and courage. "Thank you, Michael," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I'll ever be able to fully express what you've done for us. For the first time in years, I feel like I have something to hold on to. Like I can actually hope for more than just surviving." As they arrived at the apartment, Claire took a deep breath, gathering her composure before stepping inside. She was met with a wave of warmth and comfort, the kind of feeling she had once dreamed of but had been afraid to believe she could achieve. She walked through the room slowly, her eyes wide with wonder, her fingers trailing over the clean surfaces and freshly painted walls. It felt surreal, a space that was entirely hers, a space where she could create a life for herself and her children. Michael stood in the doorway, watching her explore. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a profound sense of peace in seeing her finally find stability. There was something deeply fulfilling in knowing that he had been able to give her this chance, to provide a foundation upon which she could build her life. He hadn't realized how empty his own life had been until he had the chance to truly make a difference, to watch as his actions transformed the lives of others in a way that went beyond any business deal or financial success. Claire came back into the living room, her face radiant with happiness, and threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. "This is more than I could have ever imagined," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you, Michael, for believing in me, for giving us a place to call home. I feel like I can finally breathe." He held her for a moment, feeling the sincerity in her embrace, the weight of years of hardship melting away. When she pulled back, she looked at him, her eyes bright with newfound hope. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "But I promise I'm going to work hard. I want to build a life for me and the twins, a life that honors the kindness you've shown us." Michael smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Claire, your gratitude is more than enough. Watching you rebuild your life, seeing you find happiness and stability, that's all the thanks I need." His words were heartfelt, and he could see that she understood, that she knew he meant every word. Over the next few hours, they worked together, unpacking boxes and arranging the furniture Michael had quietly provided. The apartment slowly transformed into a home, filled with personal touches that reflected Claire's warmth and love for her children. She placed framed photos of the twins on the walls, their happy faces beaming with joy. Toys and books filled a small corner of the living room, creating a cozy space where Liam and Sophie could play. As evening fell, they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Claire leaned back, a look of contentment on her face. "I can't believe this is real," she said softly, her voice laced with wonder. "For so long, it felt like every day was a fight just to keep going. But now it feels like I can finally see a future. One where we're safe, where the twins can grow up without fear." Michael nodded, his own heart swelling with pride at the life she was building. "You've earned every bit of this, Claire," he replied gently. "You've given so much to Liam and Sophie. Now it's time for you to have a chance to truly live, to embrace the life you've been fighting for." They sat together in silence, a deep understanding passing between them, a bond that went beyond words. After a while, Claire turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible, Michael. You saw me when no one else did, and you gave me a chance. I hope you know that you've become part of our family." Her words were soft but filled with an intensity that left him momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected her to say that, hadn't realized just how deeply he had embedded himself into her life, and how much she had come to mean to him as well. Michael's throat tightened, his heart filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He smiled, his voice barely a whisper. "That means more to me than you'll ever know, Claire. Being a part of your life, and it's a gift I never expected." And as he spoke, he realized the truth in his words. Claire and her children had become a part of him, a piece of his world he wasn't ready to let go of. They had filled a space in his life that he hadn't known was empty, bringing purpose, connection, and a sense of family. As the night grew darker, Michael stood, sensing it was time to leave and let her settle into her new home. "This is just the beginning, Claire," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I'll always be here if you need me. But now, this is your life, your future. And I know you're going to build something incredible." He looked at her one last time, his gaze filled with pride and admiration, before finally turning to leave. She watched him go, her heart filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that went beyond words. She knew she would never forget the man who had changed her life, the man who had restored her faith in kindness, in humanity. And as she stood on the balcony, looking out over her new home, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that this was only the beginning of a beautiful journey. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. The first few weeks in the new apartment marked a time of transition for Claire and the twins. She poured herself into her new job at the cafe, where her natural warmth and kindness quickly won over the regulars. It was a small, bustling place with a welcoming atmosphere, and each day Claire felt herself growing more confident, finding a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. She could walk to work, knowing that she would come home to a safe, warm space filled with laughter and love. For the first time, she was building a life she could be proud of. Michael visited often, always under the pretense of checking in, though they both knew his visits had become something more. He would bring small gifts for Liam and Sophie, books, toys, a cozy blanket for their room, and the twins greeted him each time with delighted squeals and open arms. The time he spent with Claire and her children became the highlight of his week, an anchor in his life that brought him a deep sense of fulfillment. One Saturday afternoon, Michael joined them at a nearby park, where Liam and Sophie ran across the open field, laughing as they chased one another in the sunshine. Claire watched them with a smile, her face radiating joy as she sat beside Michael on a bench, the two of them quietly sharing a moment of peace. It was a simple day, but to both of them, it felt profoundly meaningful, a reminder of how much their lives had changed since that fateful night when he'd found her in the rain. "Watching them like this, you'd never know how hard things once were," Claire said softly, her gaze fixed on her children, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "They're so happy, so carefree. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Michael, you've given us a life I never thought we'd have. I'll never be able to thank you enough." Michael's gaze softened, and he reached over, placing a gentle hand on hers. "Claire, seeing you and the twins like this, that's all the thanks I could ever want. I've watched you transform your life with a strength and grace that few people could muster. I'm the one who's grateful to have been part of this journey with you." His words were filled with a sincerity that brought a warmth to her heart, and she knew he meant every word. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play, their laughter echoing through the park. Michael realized, as he looked at Claire, how much she had come to mean to him. She had entered his life by chance, but now, he couldn't imagine his world without her and the twins. The days they spent together had given him a sense of purpose, a feeling of belonging that went beyond his work, his wealth, and the carefully controlled life he'd built. After a while, Claire turned to him, a shy smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I have to ask, Michael, how is it that someone like you, a successful businessman, someone who could have anything in the world, has chosen to spend so much time with us? I mean, we're just a small family starting over. Why did you go out of your way to help me, to stay so close?" Michael hesitated, her question stirring feelings he hadn't fully examined. But now, looking into her eyes, he felt compelled to be honest. "Claire, I've spent years chasing things that, in the end, left me feeling empty. Success, wealth, status, they were never enough. When I found you that night, something changed in me. Helping you, it reminded me of what truly matters. It made me feel alive, connected, as if I finally had something real to hold on to." His voice softened, and he held her gaze, his expression vulnerable. "Being with you and the twins, it's made my life fuller, more meaningful. I didn't expect this, but now, I can't imagine my life without you." Claire's eyes filled with unshed tears, her expression softened by an understanding she hadn't anticipated. She reached over, her hand gently resting over his, her touch warm and grounding. "Michael, you've become part of our family. Whether you intended to or not, you've changed our lives in ways I can't describe. And for as long as you want, you'll always have a place with us." Her words hung in the air, carrying a depth of emotion that neither of them needed to explain. In that moment, Michael felt a profound sense of connection, a certainty that he had found something truly special. The boundaries that once separated their lives had dissolved, replaced by a closeness that went beyond friendship or gratitude. It was a bond built on shared struggle, respect, and an unspoken understanding that they had both found something invaluable in one another. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, and they sat there in silence, each lost in thought, savoring the comfort of each other's presence. When it was time to leave, Michael helped Claire gather the twins, lifting Liam onto his shoulders, his laughter ringing out as he pretended to fly. Claire watched them, her heart swelling with a love that was both quiet and intense, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she felt at peace, knowing that Michael would be by her side, sharing in the life they were building. As they walked back to her apartment, Claire glanced at him, her expression filled with gratitude and a hint of something more, something that had grown steadily between them, unspoken yet undeniable. She didn't say anything, but she knew he felt it too. The weeks that followed deepened the bond between Claire and Michael, weaving their lives together in ways that felt natural and inevitable. Each shared laugh, every moment spent watching the twins grow, only reinforced the sense of family that had blossomed between them. It wasn't just the children who had come to depend on him. Claire had, too, though she realized it slowly and with some hesitation. And Michael, whose life had once been dominated by ambition and solitude, had found a peace and purpose he had never known. One evening, after the twins had drifted off to sleep, Claire invited Michael to stay for dinner. It was a quiet, intimate meal, and as they sat across from one another in the warm glow of the apartment, Claire found herself wondering if this was what home felt like, a place not just of safety but of belonging. She looked across the table at him, watching as he shared stories, his face animated, his laughter filling the room. The ease between them was effortless, a quiet joy that needed no explanation. After dinner, they moved to the small balcony, sipping tea as they watched the city lights blink against the night sky. The silence was comfortable, filled with the shared understanding that had become a foundation for both of them. But Claire could feel something unspoken lingering between them, a quiet truth that had grown too large to ignore. She took a steadying breath, turning to him. "Michael," she began softly, her voice carrying a depth of emotion that caught his attention, "I need you to know how much you've changed our lives. You've given us hope, safety, and a place to call home. But more than that," she hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "You've given me a feeling I thought I'd lost, a belief that love and family could exist even in the hardest of times." Michael's gaze softened, his expression open and vulnerable. He reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers as he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice steady, "meeting you and the twins, it changed everything for me. I thought I was helping you, but the truth is, you saved me from a life that felt empty and directionless. Being with you, seeing the joy and strength you bring into the world, it's given my life a meaning I didn't know I was missing." They sat in silence for a moment, each absorbing the weight of their words. And then, without hesitation, Michael leaned forward, his eyes holding hers as he gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, filled with a tenderness that spoke of everything they'd shared, every hardship they'd overcome, and every unspoken feeling they had held close. Claire felt her heart swell, a warmth spreading through her that felt like the truest form of home. When they pulled back, Claire looked at him, her eyes shimmering with tears of happiness and relief. "I've loved you for a long time, Michael," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know how to say it. I was afraid, after everything I've been through, to trust someone like this. But with you, it's different. I know I can finally trust." Michael smiled, his own eyes bright with emotion as he held her hands tightly. "And I love you, Claire. More than I ever thought possible." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "You and the twins are my family now. You've brought me a kind of joy and purpose I never thought I'd find. I don't want to let you go, not now, not ever." They sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, the quiet night around them filled with the promise of a new beginning. They didn't need grand gestures or declarations. Their love had been built slowly, quietly, through moments of compassion, respect, and a shared resilience that had brought them to this place. In the days that followed, Michael and Claire began to blend their lives, embracing the idea of a future together. He became more than just a friend or protector, he became a father figure to the twins, who had come to adore him as much as he adored them. They took walks together, spent lazy Sundays reading stories and laughing, their days filled with a warmth and closeness that felt like the truest form of family. Months later, Michael proposed to Claire in the very park where they had first watched Liam and Sophie play. It was a simple moment, private and heartfelt, surrounded by the memories of everything they had overcome. Claire's yes was filled with a joy she had once thought lost to her, and as they embraced, the world felt whole, complete, filled with the beauty of a love that had grown from the ashes of hardship. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended only by those who had stood by them in their journey. As they exchanged vows, Michael looked at Claire, his heart swelling with gratitude for the night he had found her in the rain, a mother holding her children, alone and desperate, but filled with a strength that had changed his life. And Claire, looking into his eyes, felt that same gratitude, knowing that this man had given her not just shelter but a second chance at happiness, a life filled with love and family. Together, they created a life that was both beautiful and real, grounded in shared dreams and mutual respect. Michael continued his work, but with a new sense of balance, his heart now rooted in the family that awaited him each night. And Claire, who had once felt lost and alone, flourished, becoming not just a mother and partner but a woman filled with hope and purpose. In the end, their story was one of transformation, two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times and created a light that would guide them forward, together, forever. If you like this story, take the opportunity to see the others that are appearing on your screen right now, subscribe to the channel and comment on what you thought of this story. See you soon, bye.